Good evening and welcome to everyone. I'm Eden McCallum, one of the founders of Eden McCallum. And on behalf of my partners, I'd like to welcome you all here this evening for our panel discussion on disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovation is a concept that was coined by Clay Christensen in his 1990s seminal work, The Innovator's Dilemma. As disruptors ourselves at Eden McCallum, Clay wrote a piece called Consulting on the Cusp of Disruption about a year ago. We've been intrigued by the concept, and so we brought together this fabulous panel of successful disruptive business leaders to share their perspectives.
So what is it that actually was disruptive that we did? First off, the product. We didn't launch a juice, we launched a smoothie. We weren't the first, but just talking about a smoothie, all the fruit crushed up in a bottle, nothing else. It was a very simple proposition for people to understand. The packaging was also completely different. Pricing also, bottles of juice were £1. We sold them for £2. A lot of people thought we were completely mad, but enough people actually thought we weren't and bought them and got the business off to a start. Probably just as importantly, though, I think, was the way we did it. I think Innocent was a social brand, sort of long before kind of social media was invented. We were always up for an open, constructive dialogue with consumers. There was a philosophy behind it as well, which was, in terms of building a business that we could be proud of, we wanted to be an ethical business, and more importantly, show that we could be a profitable ethical business, a business that was success coming from the ethics. And in terms of that, we were the first business to launch post-consumer recycled, 100% post-consumer recycled plastic bottle. That, the industry said it couldn't be done. We were saying we really want that. That's really important, and we managed to do it. We did the same with a fully recyclable plastic bottle. We paid more for ethically produced fruit, and importantly, we started with this promise of giving 10% of profits to charity, which was a really easy promise when you were losing money. Naivety is incredibly valuable. We really didn't know anything when we started, and it was incredibly helpful because it got us into this, whereas probably if we knew more, we wouldn't have done it. And the more you know, it's very easy to say it can't be done. So sort of remember that thing. Details matter is the second point. 80-20 is definitely what people always talk about, but actually I think it's the final 20% of products, that final 20% of attention that can take things from good to great, and we really always sweated those finer details, and I think that made a big impact. And then finally, it's really important to remember from small acorns, great ideas come in any size. They just happen to be great, and I think as leaders we've got to try and find great ideas and then make them big rather than saying it won't move the needle.
And I think Drucker says you're only going to change the behaviour of the mass market if you give them not something that's nearly as good, but something that's 10 times better. And that's why the humble balance inquiry has proved to be a genuine killer app in our space. But just because something's on a mobile phone doesn't necessarily mean that it's a winning proposition. And our space is littered with clever technology that really doesn't solve a customer problem. It's all too easy to paint a picture where the banks just become the dumb pipes, that all the sex and violence of mobile commerce is going on through someone else's app. But it doesn't have to end that way. You mentioned quite correctly at the start that our disruption is that we believe that actually the incumbents in this case really have got an opportunity to change that story. So why wouldn't it be your bank that the new habit is formed around in future? And that's sort of the competitive spectrum that's going on. Banks are really worried about ending up as just the dumb pipes in this revolution. So where does Monetize come in? Well, we're an enabler of banks in particular to actually follow the strategy that implies.
So what was disruptive about lastminute.com? I guess really the vision was more disruptive actually than just perishable inventory. I guess we had if you have two axes, time and then range of products you could do with your time. And so it really was about doing everything at the last minute. It was whether you were going away, going out, or staying in. And it was about solutions and so that convenience element and inspiration, which is the discount element. So that was the sort of, and it's not to say we ever managed to really complete all of that vision, because that vision is quite hard to do. In other words, how do you manage people's leisure time at the last minute and give them a better deal or make it more convenient for them is still something companies are struggling with today. If you take that disruption saying we were offering deals, price, distressed inventory at a better price than anyone else because we had A, lower cost, B, using technology in a way, in an innovative way, and the cynics would say losing lots more money and spending a lot more on technology and afforded that luxury by the market. Yes, that's true, but long term, not true. But then there were other, innovations. I think the other one, the most obvious one, was I think we were the first people in the UK to launch what's called as dynamic packaging. For those of you that aren't travel geeks, that is when you conceal the price of each item, you therefore get rates like an airline rate, a package-only net, or a hotel. That means your hotel rate that you cannot get if you buy the two separately. What that means is you get a much better deal by bundling them together secretly. Tour operators did it in a fixed way. Using technology, you were able to do that in a flexible way, giving the customers more choice. That was a real innovation for the market. But what happens is you get, like Adam spoke about, you get a window to have that. But of course, once everyone realizes dynamic packaging is exciting, and your American competitor Expedia comes over, then lots of other players go into it. The scrappy startup does do some things, and one of them I'm very proud of doing, an illegal thing that a big company couldn't do. We scraped EasyJet and Ryanair's websites without asking them. In other words, we put their fares into our site, into the package, not to get better rates for them, but to get you access to the package-only hotel rate, and to use quite a clever way of, taking the customer's credit card and passing our credit card through and all sorts of funky stuff that was, arguably criminal. There is the Misuse of Computer Act 19, whatever it was. I think I might have been a breach with that. But as I used to say to my marketing directors, if you're in prison, I know you're doing your job properly because you're trying hard enough and you're breaking all the rules of the industry.
I always feel a bit of a fraud talking about disruptive innovation for TalkTalk because I'm not the innovator. I'm the corporate suit hired to work with the innovator, Charles Dunstan. TalkTalk is Charles's second child. Carphone is his first. And so really the innovation, the disruptive innovation absolutely comes from him. And I count myself enormously lucky to work with someone who I think is one of not just Britain's but Europe's greatest entrepreneurs of our generation. And Charles keeps the innovative core of the company beating. And I try to make sure that the chaos doesn't get out of control. And we work very well together as a result. The real core of the innovation of TalkTalk was the launch of broadband using Opal's network in 2006. And Charles would say that he has only ever had one idea. It's a pretty powerful idea. It's called free. Free works really, really well. In fact, we've learnt in TalkTalk that free can work too well. So the idea behind TalkTalk was to launch free broadband at a time when BT were charging £30 a month for broadband on top of your phone and your line rental. And the team thought that they would launch free broadband and that if they were doing really well, they'd get 200,000 broadband customers in the first 6 months. They got them in the first 6 to 10 days. It worked because the regulator really wanted competition to come in. That was one of the discontinuities. It worked because there was huge and immediate demand. So the team were able, despite the chaos, to build real scale very, very quickly. And it worked because the incumbent was too slow to realise what was happening. And I totally agree with Adam's view that sometimes not knowing very much is a huge advantage for innovators, because TalkTalk and Charles bought Tiscali assuming that the integration would be quite easy. And actually Sky, Vodafone, Tesco, I think they all looked at it very seriously and walked away because they thought the integration would be nearly impossible. The integration nearly killed us. Literally nearly killed us, but it was a phenomenal deal that has created the company. Without that, we wouldn't have got the scale, and everything else we've done since wouldn't have been possible. The beauty of the naivety is that you leap. The challenge is to try and wrap enough control and support around those innovators that as they leap, they're not leaping off the Empire State Building. We worry a lot in TalkTalk about making sure that we don't become an incumbent. Because actually there are quite high barriers to entry in our market, and there's a danger that we do. So we are always looking for the next opportunity to democratise products. We're a value for money business. We're not on the bleeding edge of innovation. Everything we have launched has already been launched somewhere in the world before we get close to it, because it will be a premium product for people like us to buy. We're looking at bringing a product genuinely to mass market. When we talk about innovation, we try to zig where the rest of the world zags. We try to do something that everyone else thinks is nuts. Zigging while the rest of the world zags works most of the time. The challenge we face a lot of the time as an innovator is that sometimes if the whole world is zagging, there might be a reason. And I think that's the balance, as we're now quite a big business, is how do you sustain that love of disruptive innovation while also recognising that sometimes those big incumbents get some of the operational stuff right. And that's the balance that we find now, is how can you be a big disruptive innovator? And that's what we're still working on.
And I guess that's the question sitting out there, which is, why do these big incumbents let this happen? Why don't they spot it in the first place and do it, whether through a different subsidiary or whatever? And then B, if they didn't spot it in the first place, why don't they copy really quickly and squash these startups when they're still small? I don't know who wants to start with that.
I think I did mention some of that. It's cannibalization, I think, is the biggest issue, is fear of cannibalization. So if you look at why couldn't Thomas Cook do what we were doing? Well, one, it wasn't that important to them, which is the first thing. It was actually a very small part of their business, would have been the lates market. But more importantly, it would have disrupted their entire pricing structure for the business, which was based on the fact that they did have retail stores, they did have people in shops selling stuff, and we didn't. So we had arguably a structural advantage in trying to do that to that business. But there are many other things. I think the other big reason for me in corporate is risk. It's an attitude to risk and failure. You don't have a license to fail in a corporate. You also don't have incentive to succeed as much as you do as a challenger.
I'm guessing that all four of our businesses, multiple businesses in Brent's case, have a pretty high appetite for risk. So we would talk about it very consciously as a board, that we have a high appetite for risk. That means that we are happy to have things go wrong. That's what having that high appetite means. And we encourage our people to move faster and take decisions faster than our competitors will. Whereas I actually have some sympathy with trying to lead BT, heavily unionised, big public brands. Actually, it's harder to have that high risk appetite to accept failure. So you can just see how people get stuck there. The other thing is, I think it's very, very hard for any human being to challenge their own view of the world.
When we launched, what we did just didn't matter. It was awkward, it was fiddly, it was expensive, it was, let these guys get on with it. And actually, over a 2-year period they're right, over a 10-year period they're wrong. And that's the thing, the world moves on and consumer needs move, and you've just got to be alert to what's happening out there and have an eye on it and have a strategy to deal with it. Even if you don't launch it yourself, you've got to be thinking about how you're going to counter it. We found it got harder to launch great new innovation as we got a bit bigger. The way we tried to counter that is by basically saying, put a very smart entrepreneurial person in a room and say, develop the next big thing, and leave them to it.
When we got bigger, when we got to 2,000 people, I was so frustrated that I couldn't innovate enough in what was not my company, but a company I was founded and CEO of. So it was trying to create structures to break the rules. Corporates, I think, reward people best who cut costs. It's so much easier to sit around the boardroom table and say, I can take 10% out of cost, and that, you're going to get your pay rise for that. Or saying, well, I can launch this new crazy product in restaurant booking somewhere, and they'll be like, well, you're nuts, and no.
Whether you're running a very big company or a small one, an incumbent or a challenger, you need to give people a sense of purpose. And that is just as important in a disruptive innovator as it is in a big beast. Sometimes it's easier. Actually, it's much, much easier to be the challenger, I think, and to get everyone on your side. And it's a hell of a lot more fun. And so the secret to successful innovation is to be willing to fail and to be willing to be challenged and to keep having those ideas. And that's a very rare combination in a human being, to have the brilliance but also not let it go to your head. If you can, and I count myself very lucky that I work with one, and keeping your feet on the ground when you've been corporately successful, that's the hardest part, I think. The definition of disruptive innovation is it's an idea that turns out to be right as opposed to one that turns out to be wrong, but at the time you do it, everyone else thinks it's wrong. Otherwise, everyone else would be doing it.